Absolutely.
Awesome, awesome. So just to give a brief description, a little bit more information on who I am, like I said earlier, I am a Roots of Justice trainer, and I have been for the last 3 years, but I really consider myself to be a Black liberation creative. And what that means is that my values center around the liberation of my people, people who have had the same experiences as me in this American context specifically, but really globally, right? Blackness is global. So I'm fighting for all of us.
Yep.
And anything that I do is aligned with those values, right? So I work in the nonprofit arena to make sure that I can pay my bills, my 9 to 5. And I have worked in the nonprofit arena on and off for 10 years because service in a very Black city like Philadelphia means that I get to serve and be in community with other Black folks, right? So yeah, I'm a social justice or a Black liberation creative. I also say social justice creative that shows up through my podcasting, the Color Correction podcast. I'm trying to think of other ways that that shows up. Yeah, that's who I am. I'm going to leave it at that, and we
Yeah,
can jump into the conversation. So,
absolutely.
Brooke, I was super interested when you said, like 10 minutes before we jumped on, that you did not grow up going to church, because I assume anybody that would become a pastor must have grown up in the church and felt committed. Like the only person that would make that choice has to be somebody that's been in it for a long time and knows everything that comes with it. So, yeah, I'm interested in hearing from you as we're talking about God being a Black woman and thinking of that both from the book. And you have the insight into the book. I have not read the book yet, but also as a concept. Let's start with, who was God to you as a young person, especially a young person who wasn't growing up in the church?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to get into this. Yeah, I think um as someone who, like I said, didn't necessarily grow up going into church, my first experiences with church were really seeing my relatives go. Um,
Mhm.
like my grandmother was a big churchgoer my entire life, and she and I were very close when I was young. And so it would be like sometimes tagging along with her, or when there would be special events, if there was a wedding or a funeral, I would kind of tag along. But it was this relationship with God that was very much like looking like from the outside, looking
Mm.
in. I didn't really have, the understanding of what was happening or what was being said or the context of anything. I didn't have, a Sunday school to kind of break it down or anything like that.
Mhm.
So from the very beginning, God felt like something that was kind of hard to understand, kind of unreachable, kind of distant.
Mhm.
And I remember, I mean, I've always been a very, very anxious person, and that showed up very, very young. But I remember as a young person seeing this being that people would emote about and worship, but at the same time feel so strongly about pleasing and honoring and having reverence for. It created a lot of fear in me.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so I remember thinking of God as being not only unapproachable, but also very angry, um, very much kind of like, I mean, we kind of joke and say like the old white man in the clouds, but not even a white man in the clouds, like somebody that you can't know at all, someone that you can't picture,
Mm.
that you can't imagine at all. Kind of like in Charlie Brown, you just kind of have the voice, but you never see a
Right.
figure, right? Like, because
These
that
distant figures with authority.
right, this
Yeah.
distant figure with authority that I can never actually picture or grasp.
Mm. Mhm.
And I remember actually having dreams of going to hell and having fears of going to hell as a very, very young person, and had a lot of anxiety about upsetting this God, that God was somebody who was kind of watching my every move and, kind of keeping score and keeping
Mm.
record of my wrongs. So I think very early on, um, God always felt like kind of the power over kind of being. Um, and at the same time also kind of mixed messages, because we had like precious moments and we had like daily bread little booklets that would be kind of dusty in our basement that would kind of hint God that was more compassionate and loving, and at the same time, people were so serious about not upsetting him.
Mhm, mhm.
So it sent a lot of mixed messages and caused a lot of anxiety in someone who already kind of had a lot of fear about the unknown. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Like you
It
almost
was
didn't
fun.
know how to relate to this distant
Yeah,
entity with all this
yeah,
authority.
yeah,
Like I hear people talking about him, but I don't know what to do with all that.
yeah, like I can't
Yeah.
really um but also like having a lot of intrigue, like you mentioned, like you can't imagine how somebody could become a pastor having not grown up in the church. And I would just say that in a lot of ways, like my curiosity and intrigue got the best of me, like almost like when you know you're not supposed to know something, it makes you want to know more. um,
Mm,
and so kind of really using that to be like, okay, well, where are the spaces where I can go, where I can get these questions answered, where I can explore, where I can figure out why my grandmother is crying in the pews and why people are so emotional. Like, I don't understand.
mhm,
And so it kind of led me in the direction of just like wanting to learn the ins and outs so that I didn't have fear, so that it didn't feel unknown.
mhm.
And so trying to get as intimate with it as possible. Um,
So
and
almost like if these people speak well of this God and want to relate to this God, then there must be an avenue for me to do the same.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So yeah, I mean, honestly, like if I could talk to my younger self, I'd be like, you need to relax. Like there are many other things that you could be thinking about at this point in time, but um I joke now and say that that was my form of rebellion for that age was
Going to
uh
church.
people are telling me that I shouldn't go, so I want to. That's the thing I want to do
Mhm.
now.
That's so funny.
Yeah, so, we find our ways to push up against whatever we are told,
Yeah.
so
And it
yeah,
looks different for all of us.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I grew up super churchy and my mom always had TBN on our
Yeah.
TVs, especially on Sundays, Trinity Broadcasting Network. And I have always, if y'all can't tell by the makeup right now, I have always enjoyed the kind of camp girlies. So like Jan Crouch was doing it with the pink.
Yes. Oh
She
my
was
goodness.
doing it with the pink wig. I'm not gonna lie. So
Yes.
I found I found TV. And so if you all can't see what we're laughing at, our friend Courtney, who is doing tech and helping us out, logged into the Zoom today and is also the director of Roots of Justice and just a badass John. Period.
Yeah.
Did a laugh emoji as we were talking because everybody knows Jan Crouch and then pink
Yes.
wig.
Ate it
But
up. Yes.
so I grew up with such a white introduction
Yep.
to God. And God was at the center of my family. Faith is such a part. Faith is such a part of my family culture, right? We like when we call each other, we say it jokingly, but it is just so ingrained in us that when we call each other, we say, praise the Lord, right? That's a very Pentecostal exchange. That's like
Yep.
saying, hey, what's up? In Pentecostal, right? So yeah, that TBN, deeply committed to faith, um, introduction made God this big kind of cartoon white guy.
Yeah.
Like when
Yeah.
I would picture God in my mind, he would be this combination of Genie from Aladdin, but also a little bit of the Saturday morning TBN cartoons that came on.
Yeah.
And they never showed God in those TBN cartoons, but as a child, you need something tangible. And all
Right.
these white people on this TBN, all of these white children, even in these cartoons, God must be kind of like a white version of Genie that kind of grants promises,
Right.
and is this distant figure that cares, but it's really very exchange centered, right? I did not see, and I also didn't see God as being me, right? So I'm growing up in North Philadelphia, where people don't look like Jan Crouch. They're not wearing pink wigs. They're not looking like, yeah, all the folks that I see on TBN. So God felt like this distant judge that really couldn't understand our situation, but had a lot of opinions and enforcement about
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
definitely.
I
Yeah.
wonder what you thought God thought of you, this distant God.
Mm. Yeah, that's such a good question.
'Cause conceptually, I was told that God loved me, but similarly, I was also given all of these judgments and
Yeah,
rules that he had against me for things that felt very natural. It's very natural for kids not to listen to their parents. It's not the
right.
devil, I
Right.
promise, right? So like
It's
these
literally
nat-
psychology.
it is like human development. That's how
Yeah,
this goes.
exactly.
It's not that Jezebel in me either. It's not her, as most church girls are told. But yeah, my relationship and my impression of what God thought of me wasn't always great because
Yeah.
of this distance, because of this lack of connection. So yeah, I'm sorry, I went on instead of making space for you to respond to that.
No, no, that's very helpful filling that in a little bit. Yeah, I think I think it's a lot of messages that are contradictory, a lot of mixed messages, because I think you're right. There is an element of always being told God loves me unconditionally. God is
Mhm,
pleased with me. I am created in God's image, like all this kind of churchy language for
mhm,
God's concern for me and awareness of me. And also at the same time, it required letting go of so many of the things that made me me. It required a
mhm,
level of contorting myself and containing myself and silencing myself. And as I'm sure we'll get into, like I've had to heal from a lot of, my introduction to the church was the Black church specifically. But at the same time, that was a white God. Um,
yes.
and so healing from the anti-Blackness that was inherent in that conception of God and that teaching of God has been an ongoing journey, because I think
Mhm,
that part of that contorting myself and changing myself to please this God, um, in a lot of ways meant distancing myself from Blackness, from
mhm,
people that I knew in school, people that I grew up with, in a lot of ways,
yes.
feeling shame about them, how they spoke, how they dressed, how they acted, what they did for fun, feeling shame about those things, that really were like culturally significant. Um,
Yeah.
and this whitewashing of myself, but also God in the process. And so, yeah, very contradictory. Like
Very.
all of that in service to a God who does love me, but it's not actually unconditional. It's if it
Mhm.
looks whiter and whiter.
But nobody explicitly says that too.
Right.
Like that's the interesting thing about it as well. Nobody in the Black church is explicitly saying, we're trying to teach you to be whiter so you can be holier. But there is such an explicit denial of Blackness and this labeling of witchcraft. That's witchcraft.
Right.
That's also a language that's weaponized in the Black church. If something feels spiritual, but it doesn't quite make sense to the culture of that church, it suddenly gets turned into witchcraft when really it might just be the ancestors, right? It might just be an intentional ancestral practice, but also there are so many unintentional ancestral practices in the Black church too that get that will suddenly be labeled negatively. So
Yeah.
yeah, I've always found it so interesting how you're steered towards whiteness, but it's never explicitly said. And I don't think that the leadership realizes that they're steering towards whiteness.
No, I don't think so. And I think that that's part of the history of the Black church, and the church in general. But I'm, again, centering myself in the American experience, specifically being a descendant of enslaved people in this country. I think there's a lot caught up in respectability, and at one point using the church as a way to as a vehicle for respectability. And at one
Mhm.
point, it made a lot of sense and it helped us. And it
It
was
helped us.
a survival mechanism, and it was in that time necessary. Their priority was to prove that we could speak the King's English, that we could, be more than what they said about us, right? And
Mhm.
over time, what has happened is that we've assimilated so much that you can't even distinguish
Right.
God from a Black God now. It all has become just a white God,
Right.
in a Black expression, in a Black face, and that was something that I really had to deal with. Is that um, a lot of what I felt like God did not like about me was actually just things that were Black.
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
like what the people around me. I mean, I've always been a very small person, but a lot of people around me weren't. Like I grew up with women that were round, with women that had big butts, big boobs, like, and when that's how your DNA is wired, it moves a certain way. You move a certain way. Clothes look a certain way on you, right? But that was seen as inherently bad
And sinful.
and sinful.
Mhm.
And that hurt me. Like that added shame to where I come from and who my people are. And all of that was a part of, because we are God's people, we have to look a certain way, we have to act a certain way, we have to present ourselves a certain way. Um, and so just all of the different ways, the music that we listen to, all these kinds of
Mhm.
things. I knew there was a period of time where I wouldn't listen to any secular music. Well, I was not fun at the cookout, right? Like I I, I now cannot
You
enjoy,
turned your back on Frankie Beverly?
right? Like, like there was a period of years where I wouldn't know how to, you know, I wouldn't be able to be in that space and feel
Mhm.
family and feel connection because I had been so disconnected from it.
Mhm.
Um, and the things that we would connect over and find fun and find pleasure in, felt like, no, I can't do that,
Right.
and I've had experiences in Black churches and in white churches, and I think that I'm able to say, like, having been in both for some time, that at the end of the day, it kind of gets you to the same place.
Mhm. What do you mean by get you to the same
Like
place? What are your
the,
thoughts on that?
the same ways um of anti-Blackness. It just
Mhm.
it looks a little bit different, but it
Mhm.
still is anti-Black, I guess is what I'm trying
Yes.
uh,
Yes. It
and
has you, it
yeah,
gets you to the same place of landing at a white God that's distant from Blackness.
that make us whiter than snow uh
Mhm.
is still the goal at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And so what I've tried to do for healing in myself and for healing in those around me is to say that, the things that we needed to survive at one point, we can respect and honor and hold space for, and also not have to continue, right?
Exactly.
So we don't have to bow down to a white God anymore. It
Mhm.
doesn't serve us any longer.
Mhm.
So I think that that's where I've tried to get to and help people get to.
And what has that shift looked like for you? How have you started moving towards a God that looks different, that has a different experience, that has a experience that resonates with you?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, a long journey. I think it's been a mixture of personal things that have happened in my own life. I think
Mhm.
it's also been very academic, because unfortunately, a lot of it was through study and through seminary that I was even exposed to other ways of thinking and doing theology, that I was introduced to womanism and liberation theology and Black
Mhm.
theology, things that should be accessible to everybody, but unfortunately still sometimes get locked up in the academy. But once I was in that space, it introduced me to, thinkers who have existed in the 20th century. And we're always
Mm.
saying these things and always kind of aware of these systems inside and outside of the church that really challenged oppression in the ways that it was perpetuated through our beliefs. Um, I think of people like James Cone, who declared that God was Black. And I think of womanist scholars like Dolores Williams and Emily Towns and Katie Cannon, who
Mhm.
in the womanist perspective to that as well, that the experiences of Black women are also inherently good and sacred, and need to be centered if we are to uh, understand God authentically. And so I
Yeah.
think that opened me up to even picturing God differently in my mind,
Yeah.
and thinking about how God really feels about me and about where I come from and about my communities. Um, so academia, also kind of pop culture, which I think you and I kind of talked about a little.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so
For me, the concept first got introduced to me by Crystal West from The Read. And she
mhm,
kind of just flippantly said in a conversation with Kid Fury, like, I don't know what y'all are talking about, or something like, God is a Black woman, anyways. And I think she even said God is a queer Black woman, or somebody, a friend that I said it to, followed up with that. Right. And I remember having this almost visceral reaction of like, that's not right. The idea of God being a Black woman, like, that's not right. And this was like 6 years ago. I was already in my organizing communities. I had already been exposed to liberation theology. So the fact that my instinct was to kind of like, yeah, like my chest tightened, the fact that I had that visceral reaction, I was like, okay, there's more work that I need to do here. And there's more research that I need to do. And that's when I really started diving into Black liberation theology, and also followed up with womanist theology. And I also find it, pop culture again, find it so interesting that Katie Cannon is Nick Cannon's like cousin or auntie or something like that. They're like distantly related. So yeah, it was something that got introduced to me, and I wanted to reject it, right? My socialization, my indoctrination of who God was, this distant white man in the sky that had these judgments of me, really finally came to a head just briefly listening to that podcast, in that moment, listening
yeah.
to that podcast. So yeah, I wonder for you, when were you first introduced to this as a concept?
You mean in pop culture or in general?
In general, the concept of God as a woman. Like,
Uh,
when was the first time you ever even considered that? Can you remember the moment?
I think I think it was when I was in seminary, and I don't remember exactly. Actually, I think I remember the class where we were. It was actually a class that was on feminism in general in theology. But we know that that can be really white,
Right.
and so we had to kind of talk about what are other thinkers talking about. And so I think at that point, even just the idea of feminist theology kind of opened my mind to even just the Bible itself, for me, how it has such an expansive way of even describing God. So spirit
Mhm.
being a feminine word, to God being described as a mother hen, uh,
Mhm.
to God really not having a gender. Like, it ended up opening up all of these possibilities, especially when it came to the Holy Spirit, even the person of Jesus Christ himself. That was the first time I was introduced to Jesus, even though he was a man historically. The first time I was introduced to him as someone who really challenged um, what gender looked like, being a man who expressed himself emotionally, being someone who
Mhm.
was um and so it kind of, I think that that was the first time, was talking about just feminist ways of reading the Bible. And then very shortly after that have been introduced to womanists who really centered the everyday experiences of Black women as a viable way of connecting to the divine.
Yeah.
Something clicked. And over time, when I prayed or when I worshiped, like what I felt was different. Like I felt someone who was more like me, who did look like
Mhm.
me, talk like me, you know, feel more like the relatives I know. Uh, so yeah.
Yeah. I resonate with that thinking of God through the lens of Blackness and through the lens of womanism, like thinking of God as a Black woman makes more sense. It resonated with me. It clicked a little bit differently and it felt more aligned with what I've seen growing up. In my experience in my family, we do have men who are bishops and pastors and preachers. Like I said, faith is a part of my family culture in general, but the women do the work. The
Yeah.
women are the ones that I heard tarrying first thing in the morning. My mother was the one that would come in my bedroom at 5 a.m.,
Yes.
speaking in tongues. This connection to the divine felt especially pertinent, particularly I think because the women in my family are also, we emote a lot, right? We're very connected to our emotions. We're very connected to our femininity. It made more sense to think of a God through this lens of, yeah, who my mother is and who my aunties are. It
Yeah.
clicked differently.
Yeah, definitely. I've had the same experience. And I think you and I talked about this before, but I grew up with my dad, love him to death. He's a great man. And also like the women in my life were the center of the show. They were the
Mhm,
ones who called the shots. They were the ones who, the men were kind of more in the background. They were quiet. They were kind of passive. They were kind of the receiver of the agenda for for the day,
mhm.
for the vacation, for the whatever. And that's always been true. My mom, my stepmom, my grandmother, my aunts, my neighbors who acted like aunts, like
Mhm.
Black women around me were always the people who ran everything. They were the ones who held things together. They
They're
were
the
the
ones with the answers in my
yeah,
family
the
too. If
ones
I didn't know something, I could go to any of them. They seem to always know. The other
they
one, but my dad would be shaky sometimes.
yeah, they were the ones
He had
that
been
made
at work all day.
it, like I was very much like a uh ask your mother type of relationship with my dad.
Mhm,
Like
mhm,
honestly, still to this day, I mean, God bless him, but yeah, I mean, he doesn't have his own calendar,
mhm.
and so I say this kind of jokingly, but also just kind of I think that being able to conceptualize God as a Black woman really validated my experiences
Yeah.
of seeing women being the strong ones, and I don't mean strong ones in a way of we need to be the strong Black woman trademark. But they were the nurturers,
That's the reality.
the guards of the family. And that really was all I saw my entire life.
Mhm.
And that made it so that, grieving Black women is really different because they are such pillars and such anchors. Um, Having falling outs with them, having disagreements with them, it just hits different because they are the ones that hold everything together.
Mhm.
And so thinking of God as being like them, just yeah, I mean, it made a lot more sense. It was like, oh, these are the people that have been checking on me my whole life. These are the
Mhm.
people that helped me get where I am, the ones who knew everything. So why wouldn't God be like that?
Yes. Why isn't this a reflection of holiness, right? Like I've been told that holiness looks like, well, for some of my family, I didn't grow up like this, but the long denim skirts and you can't wear, red toenail polish or all of these different restrictions. what were labeled as righteousness and holiness,
Yeah.
but the simplicity of my mother and my aunts navigating the world and engaging people with love. My mom can make strangers laugh, right? Like
Yeah.
that simplicity felt more like holiness for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's such a good That's such a good image. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I spent a lot of my childhood embarrassed because of my mom just, I wanted her to be a little bit more low key. I wanted her to be a little bit timid, as a kid where you're embarrassed by everything. I'm like, why are you like, telling the drive-through guy off? Why are you like arguing in the parking lot? Like just the whole world was under her, like whatever she wanted, it was gonna get
She's
done.
going to assert it. Yeah.
And that kind of assertiveness was always very intimidating to me, and also was one of the things that was very demonized in church culture, was
Mhm.
women were supposed to be quiet and submissive and not spoken till spoken to.
That's
And
why I mentioned Jezebel earlier.
exactly. So it was something that like made me uncomfortable because I was a kid and you are embarrassed by everything your parents do. But also there was this messaging around like that's not even how women are supposed to be.
Mhm.
So again, that anti-blackness and shame that gets caught up in how you feel about yourself and other people who look like you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So, as you've made these shifts, what shifts have you felt in, yeah, your journey of faith as you've been navigating your faith?
Yeah. There's been quite a lot of them. I mean, I think that there is a very deep peace that I have um now because again, like I started off with a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear about God. And now I think that there is a lot of peace about God's satisfaction with me. I'm able to have confidence in myself, confidence in my people,
Mm,
confidence in um the fact that God's not limited to the Bible or to church or to doctrine or even to a religion. Like I have this freedom now to see God in myself, in nature,
mm,
people who took care of me, to my ancestors, my culture. I just see God as a lot more limited, and that has also lifted my limits of myself
mm.
in a lot of ways. And I have cared a lot more for myself, for my body and spirit, um, to see God reflected in me. Yeah.
Mm,
And to see myself as an extension um, of the divine.
mm. Does it feel like you have more compassion towards yourself?
Yeah, yeah. I think more compassion for myself. I think more curiosity, more freedom, more fluidity. And I think that this is something that we didn't mention, but there is more rigor when it comes to issues of social justice. I know that you are very active in that. But one of the things that was very hard for me about uh, God as a kid was that God was so uninterested in the everyday conditions that Black people were living in. And
Mhm,
Black women specifically, while I thought that they were amazing, so many of them struggled, right? Like they struggled in
mhm,
relationships, they struggled financially, they struggled with all types of body issues and
mhm,
medical issues and all these injustices that made their lives harder. Um, and for a time, there wasn't really a God who was very interested in that. There was
mhm,
God who was always kind of pointing people back to heaven, pointing people to the invisible, pointing people to, don't worry about it. Like heaven's going to be great. And so there wasn't really a God who was like very interested in our earthly now. Um,
mm,
so I think now seeing God as a Black woman, um, suffering is not something that is acceptable, right? Like suffering is
mm,
something that God sends to build our character or something that God sends to build patience in us. Like suffering is something that God wants to get rid of, right? And calls us to get rid of, whether it
Mhm.
shows up in a relationship, in a toxic environment, systemically. Like God calls us to be a part of that immediately, not waiting someday for heaven. And I feel like
Mhm.
it's one of the biggest differences that I've seen in myself is that there is this immediacy about earthly conditions that I didn't get before.
Yeah, I feel like thinking of God as a Black woman has done the same for me, right? It makes me a more actionable Christian,
Right.
and really directs the way I form my theology, right? So if I'm thinking of God as a God that aligns himself with the most oppressed amongst us, then of course God is a queer, disabled Black woman, right? And that's going to direct my pursuits. That's going to direct how I form, how I think of God, how I think of forming the church, how I relate to people in my life. Thinking of God that way has given me so much more direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Absolutely.
never really thought of faith or being a Christian as something that needs direction. It's just how you feel it and what you do when the spirit arrives. But like, no, this
Yeah.
God as a Black woman
Yeah.
is an actionable God. But that's
Absolutely.
also difficult. As soon as it came out of my mouth that second time, I wrestle with that as well because of the way America just and assumes that it can have our labor, right? That like the only relationship America really has had with Black folks and especially the Black woman is production. So saying that thinking of God as a Black woman makes my faith more actionable. Yeah, I feel a little bit of tension with that. I have to think about that a little bit more. What are your thoughts on that challenge?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's difficult because I may also need to spend some time sitting with it, but there is
Mhm.
tension, right? In the who we believe God to be and in the reality that we're living in right now. I mean, there are also Black people who may listen to this thinking, oh, well, that sounds great and wonderful, but here we are on Juneteenth and we still are living in certain conditions as Black
Mhm.
people. Where is this God who's so actionable? Like, I think that those are real tensions that I don't necessarily have answers for, but that I live with. Uh,
Mhm.
I live with the tensions in that, and I live with the fact that while I may feel immediacy, it doesn't always feel like God responds in the immediate.
Yeah.
And that there is that part of me that emphasizes with our ancestors who did, like, their hope was in the next life because they're like, baby, we're not getting it in this life,
We're not
like.
getting here.
So that's where I really emphasize with Negro spirituals that talked about
Mhm.
talked about getting to the other side, right? Because what we got down here is not cute, right? Like.
They really knew the only rest they would get would be in death.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I wrestle with that, and I think
Mm.
I have to sit with that. Yeah. It's hard.
It
It's probably
is.
the biggest things that I come to at the end of this, is what do we do with this very big, very deep in the meantime?
Yeah.
It, but in Christina Cleveland's book, which I highly recommend, one of the things that she talks about with God as a Black woman is even the reality of feeling is something that she feels like is not, she calls it white male God. She puts it all as one word, just describes white male God. And so one of the things that she says about white male God is that God is not concerned with human emotion. And whereas God as a Black woman really is in the feeling with us, in the messiness.
Mm. Mhm.
So even feeling deep tension in my body still feels closer to divinity than the faith I grew up with, which would have said, you can't trust your heart, you can't trust your feelings, like your feelings don't matter, your
God
body.
didn't give you a spirit of fear and all
Yeah,
that stuff.
exactly. Like you don't need, like, just pray about it. Just trust God. Like you don't need to be caught up in your feelings. You don't need to think about your feelings. No, if God is a Black woman, God is because of God's inherent femininity, God is able to sit in tensions with me, and is able to not only understand, but has also sanctified every emotion
Mm,
I could ever have, even when
mhm.
it's, I don't really know about you
Right,
sometimes, right? Like,
right.
and that really frees me up, is that like that is also not something that creates distance between me and God. The fact that I don't really always like what she be doing. Like, but that is not something that can isolate me. So I think that that's also been really powerful, is to also see all of those emotions as holy as well.
Mm, that's really beautiful.
Mhm.
So, we're going to take some time now to answer some questions. So, if you are still tuned in, please feel free to drop some questions in the Facebook Live chat now. And our first question is directly to you, Brooke. In thinking back to your own spiritual and religious experiences growing up, I'd love to hear how you, as a pastor, would respond to a young person who comes to confide in you about God, confiding you about the God they don't believe in anymore. How might you walk with them as they deconstruct a white male cisgender God into something new? So
Mhm.
somebody, a Black woman, a young Black woman walks up to you and is like, this ain't making no sense. I
Mhm.
need something different. How do you
Yeah.
have that conversation with them? It looks like specifically as a pastor, but I also wonder what it looks like as a friend.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for this question. Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of things I could do. There's a part of me that I think would want to, first of all, validate, what if God is a Black woman, there is not a test of your faith against any creed or against any theology or any textbook or any book that you need to contort yourself to fit, right? So um I would validate this person in saying that, it's okay to doubt, to question, to even go through periods where you don't believe, or even end up being in a place where you don't believe. But I think because our country is so built on white nationalist Christianity, I think that when some people express any type of doubt or disbelief, it's really not God that they are doubting, but it's what they've been taught. And so I think I would also just kind of see if the person might be open to other ways of thinking about faith, other people who have lived lives of faith and spirituality in general that are a little bit kinder, more compassionate, more liberative. Um, it's okay to share resources, and they don't even always have to be any particular faith. For me, like I said, I said something earlier about the color purple when Bethany and I were talking. Books, literature, music, pop culture, things that help paint a picture of humanity and our relationships with one another, that really get at how we can live more authentically. So I think it depends on the person, but I think first validate, um, let the person know that, this is a journey. It ebbs and it flows, and it's okay to end up wherever you end up. And also, let's interrupt the white nationalist Christianity that we all live in America, with some other images of what this can look like. And if you still don't believe, then that's okay. But it's important that we are lifting up some other narratives.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, I just looked at the chat. I don't think we have any other questions. So I'm going to wrap us up. But first, Brooke, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with folks?
Um, I I don't know. I think one of my hopes for this conversation is just that folks will, oh, we did get a new question.
New question came in. Somebody came in writing down to the wire.
Yes, this but I was just gonna say I'm excited to see what this question is, and I just hope that this conversation just frees people up
Yeah.
and helps people feel like their curiosities and who they are is holy and sacred, no matter who you are. God as a Black woman doesn't mean that God is only a Black woman, but
Mhm.
uh, it means that when we get very, very specific and we center the most marginalized, it frees all of us, and it frees
Mhm.
us to see God in a variety of ways. Um, so I hope that it frees us.
So this question is, how do you have conversations slash deal with, I'm going to say, how you deal with Black folks who have a difficult time with the concept of God being Black, and also in particular with God being a Black woman? I'm actually still figuring that out. I've been thinking about that a lot. I even hesitated to I didn't invite family to this conversation because I'm still figuring that out. Because yeah, respectability really controls the way faith is viewed. Um,
Yeah.
Traditionally in my family, and that's not a criticism, like you said earlier, this was a survival mechanism. It's how my family thrived in a very, very white town. So I understand it. Um, but it does make conversations around expanding our theology difficult and also scary. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm still figuring that out. But one of the ways that I approach it is with compassion. When I'm having conversations with my mom, especially because she's my mom, I
Yes.
want, the tendency is to have a lot of tension, to be like, man, you just, God's a woman, get over it, right? Like I still turn into that kind of like teenager.
Yeah.
But because I want her to be freed up too, right? I want everybody that I encounter to be freed up, and to be able to access a theology that brings freedom to them. I remind myself that I want to approach the conversation with compassion. And that's been really helpful. So, curiosity and compassion. Why do you reject that concept? I struggled with that as well, but tell me what's coming up for you, right? That's one of the ways that I've been approaching it. But
Yeah.
sometimes I'm a little huffy.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. Again, like I think the conversation is generational. I think it's, it especially some of our relatives who have been through so much trauma in their lives, trauma in our bodies, generational trauma. Sometimes the beliefs that we hold are the things that got us through really hard times. And
Yeah.
when our beliefs are connected to trauma, it makes it even harder to let go of those ideas. So I try and hold those things with compassion and also non-judgment, because there was a point in time where I would have also rejected this conversation. So
Right.
no, sometimes it takes time, and it takes the right journey and the right person to kind of help people along. Um,
Having
I,
friends in this conversation is really important too. The fact that I had Black women that could back this concept up with books and theology, and they're wrestling with it, being in community with Black women is so important to the conversation as well. I appreciate you mentioning that.
yeah, absolutely. I think I will also say to this question, I don't believe that God has a, a gender or race, right? Like I
Right.
believe that God is beyond all of that, and at the same time in all of that. And so in order for both to be true, there has to be space for something that is very, very specific, like
Mhm.
woman or God as a Black woman, to also be true, right? So that's not negating the fact that God can also exist in a multitude of ways.
Yes.
But there is freedom in being specific and being particular. We are all made in the image of God. And to take that even one step further, I do not believe that there is anything God has created that isn't an expression of God in some way. And so literally anything that has been created is a reflection of the divine.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, it's a statement that just is a fact. It's not a statement that negates, it's a statement that includes.
Mm.
And in that inclusion, we need to be able to see ourselves as a reflection, as well as, inherently worthy, not just in a general abstract sense, but there is fundamentally something about me that is in God.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also ask Black people and other people in general, what is the fear if God is a Black woman? Because there was also a point in time where I didn't like to say that, because it made me feel like God was less powerful. It made
Mm-hmm.
me feel like God suddenly becomes flawed, or God suddenly becomes less all-knowing or less all-powerful. And then I had to undo that thinking in myself. So what is the fear there? Get to the heart of the fear. Because a lot of Black folks have no problem at all having white Jesus, right? So where does that come from? And how
Right.
much of that is tradition, and how much of that is actually what we get in the text? And so I think it's pulling apart, where is the fear, and also what does it really mean that I am a reflection of this God?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And my final thought that I was going to add is something that you kind of went into, right? That like this is a theology that is meant to bring God nearer to you, um, not to exclude, right? So this is an opportunity to be met by God in closer, more intimate, and newer ways. So
Yeah.
I encourage folks to look at it that way.
Absolutely. And it's also a call to action, right? Like,
Mhm.
because there's a lot to undo in our churches, and in faith spaces in particular. There's a lot to undo, and white supremacy is not just something that shows up in our political spaces. It's in our churches, it's in our interpretations, it's in our translations
Mhm.
of text. That is also a tool that can be used to hurt or harm. How things are literally translated into English have biases
Yep.
that we undo, right? So this is also a call to action to not only figure out how we can make the conditions of Black women's lives better and our loved ones, but also how do we get rid of white supremacy no matter where it shows up, even if
Mhm.
it's in those places that we have held the most sacred in our lives. It's really hard, but really important.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Well, that is everything that we have, Brooke. And it doesn't look like I'm not seeing any other questions. Um, so no more questions. Yeah. So I think we're going to close it out. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. You have so much wisdom and insight, and just being in community with you, being a friend of yours is a blessing and an honor and a gift. So thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bethany and Courtney, for having me. Y'all are people that just bring me so much joy and hope. And I was just so excited to be part of this and to be invited. So thank y'all. This was wonderful.
Absolutely. And we continue to have conversations like this monthly. So please, if you're watching this, be sure to follow the Roots of Justice page on Facebook, on Instagram, as well as please feel free to donate to the work that we're doing, especially it's Juneteenth. So if you got $1, be sure to holler
Yes.
so we can keep on doing this work. So yeah, that's all we have today. Great seeing you all, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Bye.
I think I stopped it.